We're learning Perek Yud Halacha Zayin Melochim. Hilchos Melochim in the Rambam. The Rambam begins Hamilo Nistava Bo Avram V'Zarei Bilvad. Circumcision is required and commanded only to Avram and his seed alone. Shenama says Ato V'Zarecho Acharecho, you and your seed after you. We'll go down to the Peirush. And not Benoyach, it says Shenema, it says in Bereshis, Ato Zarecho Acharecho Deroisom. Hashem gave the mitzvahs only to Avram. Yotzo Zarish and Yishmael, this excludes the Yisrael of Yishmael. Shenema ki bi Yitzchok yikor lecho Zohar. Only Yitzchok, bi Yitzchok limits it, only Yitzchok will be called your seed, not Yishmael. Therefore, Bnei Yishmael are not commanded to circumcise. Yotze Esov is not obligated. Shall Yitzchok come to Yaakov? Yitzchok said to Yaakov, Yitanoch es birkas Avraham, that when he left him to go seek a wife, said Hashem should give you the blessings of Avraham, Lachor, to you and your seed afterwards. Michlal, from this we see Shehu Levadi Zari Shel Avram, that he alone is the seed of Avram. Hamasi V'Doso, who keeps his religion, V'Dar Kori HaYeshor, on his straight way of Avram. V'Hem Mechuyuvim V'Milah, they are obligated in the circumcision. As the Mishnah cites Sanhedrin, Milo Yisrael was said to Klal Yisrael V'Lo Bnei Noach, not Bnei Noach, because when the Torah commanded only Avram, as Brisi Tishmar, my commandment shall you keep. You and your seed afterwards for all time. And the Gemara questions also Bnei Yisrael, they're the seed of Avram. Why don't they have to circumcise? And the answer is because it says, because the Pasuk says, Ki Yitzchok Yikol HaZorah. Only Yitzchok, and not Yishmael. So the more questions with Esau. The more answers Yitzchok Yikol HaZorah, will they call Yitzchok. Not all of Yitzchok. This excludes Esau, who is not called his seed. The Rambam doesn't bring this drasha, but he brings this other passage of Yitanoch because Avram. Yitzchok is called Zer Avram. Bris was given only to Yaakov. Also in Hilchos Yesodei, it says, we find that the Gemara mentions it, that if you makes the vow not to benefit from the seed of Avram, he can benefit from Yishmael. And Bnei Esau did not call Zari Shel Avram, only Yisrael, because it's Ki Yitzchok Yichor Lecho Zorah. Yitzchok said to Yaakov, Yitanoch es birkas Avram. The Lecha Mishnah makes you aware that in the Dorim, Esau is considered mi ki bi Yitzchok, but lo calls Yitzchok, and the Rambam chooses at times his own psukim. And his intent is that it's difficult with the Gemara. How do you know Yitzchok is the only one that's called Zer Avram and not also Yishmael, Chas v'Sholom? Therefore, it says Yitzchok said to Yaakov, God will give you the bracha of Avram to you and your seed alone. In this pasuk, it seems that the Mayim Hashem Avram Ki Yitzchok Yichor Lecho Zorah means the Yitzchok and afterwards to Yaakov and not Esau. That this pasuk seems to be a clarification of what Ki Yitzchok Yichor Lecho Zorah means. That's how the Rambam understood it. There's a medrash that says that when Yaakov left to Choron, Esau went to Yishmael because the Mehem Gdova brings it down, because he went to Yishmael, tell Yishmael, look who's getting the brachas of Avram. Yaakov, he wanted Yishmael to kill Yaakov, and then as the Goyal Adam, Esau would kill Yishmael, and he would be left with the brachas. We're continuing Hilchos Melochim Perek Yud Halacha Yiches. The Rambam says, the Chacham told us from Lake Keturah. These are the children that were born to Avram after Sarah died and he took Keturah. Shem Zari Shel Avram. They are considered the seed of Avram. Shebo Acha Yishmael. they were born after Yishmael and Yitzchak, and Yitzchak both of them were born Chayov and Mila. They are obligated to circumcise. Amar Chachamim, Avraham Avinu and his command and his seeds were commanded in Mila. Yishmael and Esav are limited, not required, because they're not considered the seed of Avraham. But Bnei Keturah were born after Yishmael and Yitzchak, and it doesn't say, you can't say that they were limited from Yitzchak. Therefore, they're liable with Mila, with Hoyel v'Nisavu Hayoim b'nei Yishmael b'nei Keturah. Since the two groups have merged, Yishmael and Keturah, Yischayav HaKol b'Mila b'Shmini. Technically, they're all liable to circumcise on the 8th day. Maybe it's a b'nei Keturah. Even if they don't circumcise, that there's no penalty of death. It gets a Mishnah side Sanhedrin, Av Yosef Oven, and others say it was Av Yosef Hanino, it's Brisi Hefer. That includes the children of Keturah. Rambam explains that they Keturah and their children, and not only those that are mentioned in the Torah, but their seed forever. And Rashi does not require it of their seed. The Kesef Mishnah explains only on 7 mitzvahs to be put to death, not on 8. And even though they're commanded, they are not put to death on it. The Mishnah Lamelach pushes us off that when it says on 7 mitzvahs they killed, that's because it obligates all the nations, but it could be for a specific nation. There could be an obligation. If we would know who they were, they would be liable to the death penalty. Therefore, he says that the intent of the Rambam is since they're mixed together with Bnei Yishmael, everyone is liable with Milo because they're Bnei Keturah. If they don't do so, they're not given the death penalty because of a suffix, because maybe they're not. And it's a Bnei Keturah, he would be liable for the death penalty. Shagas Aliyah says they're not given the death penalty. I don't know if the reason is because they were mixed together with Bnei Yishmael, and you don't kill them yourself, like maybe the Bnei Yishmael, or we know that the Bnei Keturah are killed, like the Mishnah Lamelach, or the intent is that the Keturah are liable b'Mila and they're not killed like the Kesef Mishnah, because there's no 8. It's an eighth mitzvah according to the Kesef Mishnah, and he makes his decision that the intent of the Rambam is like the Kesef Mishnah. Bnei Yishmael are only killed on 7 mitzvahs, not on other additional mitzvahs. It's certainly so that they're not killed regarding mitzvah. It doesn't take effect by all Bnei Noach, only by some of them from Zerah Avram. Shagas Aliyah infers, according to the Rambam, Higrim, who are Arabs who are Yishmaelim, that they do circumcise themselves after when they're 13 years old. A Jew would be obligated to circumcise them out of doubt because they were mixed with Bnei Keturah. And he questions, it says, on this day, Avram and his son Yishmael were circumcised, even though he was not the seed of Avram. It must be that Yishmael is added from his Brisi Hefer, just like we add Bnei Keturah. Why Bnei Keturah were liable in Mila? Because it says Brisi Hefer, their seed afterwards is also liable. Yishmael, that Yishmael is not added from that posuk, and he concludes, according to the Rambam, does not remove Yishmael, because it says Yishmael is called the seed of Avram, but by Yitzchak, that's when Yishmael is taken away, because we find Yitzchak calls him only Yaakov, the bris of Avram. Therefore, they're not liable to be circumcised because of the second posuk, and that's why the Rambam would bring the second posuk. He adds that the Rambam infers that the Chacham say the Bnei Keturah are liable with Milo, that is the seed of Avram, that came after Yishmael and Yitzchak, because the Atav Zarecho Acharecho, you and your seed after you, is only to eliminate Bnei Yishmael that were born before Yitzchak, but Bnei Keturah that were not yet born were not eliminated from this posuk, and therefore they considered you and your seed afterwards. But if we have to add Bnei Keturah Ves Brisi Haifa, you shouldn't think that Yitzchak Yikol Hazorah also removes them, whether they're born at that prior to Yitzchak or afterwards. And that the posuk tells us as Brisi Haifa to tell you that Yitzchak Yikol Hazorah does not eliminate all the seed of Avram, only Yishmael that was born prior to Yitzchak and Bnei Keturah that were not yet born. Just that the question is, Zera Yitzchak Atzadik is worse than Zera Bnei Keturah or Shoyim. Zera Yitzchak, only some of them are called Zera Avram, and Bnei Keturah, all of them are called the seed of Avram. And one can answer, and therefore he brings the posuk that Yitzchak. Yitzchak said to Yaakov, that from here we see Esav is not called the seed of Avram, and the intent of Yitzchak was to remove Esav. Therefore, it does not remove Bnei Keturah. The Teis Rosh is the opinion Bnei Keturah and their seed are liable b'milah only until Matan Torah. But when Torah was given, and Yisrael was specifically given the commandment, the mitzvah was removed from them. The Shagas Ai, just like it was removed according to the Rambam, from the 7 mitzvahs were removed from the Bnei Noach and returned to them by Yisrael after the Klal Yisrael teaches it to them. The Shagas Ai adds that Ein Bnei Keturah obligated to do Priya, only Milah, because mitzvah Milah there's 2 parts. You cut off the orla, and you push the skin that's left, and you push it backwards, and that's called Priya. It uncover the Torah. In Rambam it says Priya was not given to Avraham Avinu. In Rambam 71b, and Tosfos says Halacha l'Moshe Sinai Priya. It was only in Israel. Now Bnei Keturah, therefore by Yisrael, Bnei Keturah are called Arelim, because they don't have the Priya. In Israel, we learned in Shabbos, Movel Porah, but Jew does bris without Priya, it's as if there's no bris. Thus we see that even according to the Rambam, the Milah of Bnei Keturah is not the same as that which was given to Yisrael. And the Rambam, it says clearly in Perek Tes Halacha Yud, that measures or how to do things is said to Yisrael, because Halacha l'Moshe B'Sinai was not given to Bnei Noach, like the Shagas Aliyah. Halacha l'Moshe B'Sinai was given only to Yisrael, so Bnei Keturah Chayim B'Milah and not B'Priya, because that was given through Moshe Rabbeinu, Halacha l'Moshe B'Sinai. That's the opinion of the Meiri, Chinuch. Bnei Keturah are not obligated B'Priya. But Anachal Eson is the opinion that this depends on the machlokes if Priya was given to Avraham Avinu, and he proves from Yerushalmi that it was given to him, as it says Bnei Keturah are also liable be Priya. The Shagas Ai adds that Yisrael Milas on the 8th day pushes off Shabbos. Bnei Keturah it does not push off Shabbos. Therefore, what does that mean? Obviously, they don't keep Shabbos, but Yisrael cannot circumcise Bnei Keturah b'Shabbos. The din is that if you circumcise and do not do Priya, it's as if you didn't do so. And if circumcise Bnei Keturah without Priya, it's Chil Shabbos. And therefore, Bnei Keturah Shemo Atzmoi, he's not kosher to, even though he has an obligation, he cannot circumcise a Jew. Because by a Jew, it's considered like he's not circumcised. Only because since they don't do Priya. The Marashah says that the Keturah were commanded on Milah and not on Priya. As it says, Yichad Yisroel Shemolos Atzmai. We know Yisroel was from Bnei Keturah. The Gemara questions he was from Midian, Bnei Keturah, and even so, he was therefore circumcised. Why did he do it again? And the answer is he did it without Priya. Now he did Priya. But the Tama Melech is the opinion that according to the Rambam, Mektura can circumcise Yisrael, that he's obligated to Milo, and he's called Nimor. Shai Zalya questions that the main, or concludes that the main idea is like Rashi, Bnei Keturah are only obligated to Milo, not their seed after them. Therefore, there's no obligation to do so to the Arabs. That even if they were mixed with Bnei Keturah, they are not liable according to Rashi. Sharas Ayu, the son of the Rebbe Yehuda, question, and the son of the Rebbe Yehuda, question, even according to the Rambam, that Bnei Keturah and their seed are obligated to circumcise, but after that Sanchev mixed all the nations, like we find in Hilchos Yesodei the Mitzrayim that live today in Egypt are not at different people, and the Edoim, since the four nations who are forbidden to mix with Klal Yisrael are no longer recognizable. They are all permitted, because we say anything that separates from to become a convert from the nations would be, the majority would not be from those four. Therefore, every convert is permitted to marry, because we're not concerned maybe he's from Edom or Mitzri or Ammoni and Moavi, and therefore all the nations today can convert, and they're also not obligated to circumcise, even according to the Rambam. He brings a question. It could not be that Bnei Keturah, who are circumcised with nations that are not, that became mixed with nations that are not circumcised, and they're not like Am and Moav, that could mix with other nations, because they are of their type, and therefore the Rambam is understood. Only Bnei Yishmael, Bnei Keturah can mix, because they also had the meaning of bris. So we find in the Shoel Umeshiv. And therefore the intent of the Rambam is only Bnei Yishmael were mixed and Bnei Keturah were mixed. In the Kundas Achon, they clarify the question. The Kshagas Aliyah is built on Sancherev, and there's no in its place, and therefore we have to presume that most of the majority of the world, Bnei Keturah, are a mixture that's also a mixture of Yishmael. Machon Nesher explains that according to the Shagas Aliyah was simple, that there are other nations that circumcise themselves. Like in Avodah Zorah, we find Arabi Moil, Givoni Moil, that they were practicing circumcision. Rashi explains a nation. It doesn't mean specifically that there are nations that were circumcised. Therefore, when Sancherev mixed the nations, he questioned that he mixed in as well the Bnei Keturah, because these other nations that are not obligated to circumcise themselves. But the Machon Nesher brings from Rabbeinu Hananel that Arabi and Givoni, they're from Bnei Keturah. There's no proof that other nations ever circumcise themselves. The Machon Nesher explains the Rambam goes according to the Shita. Bnei Keturah mixed only with Bnei Yishmael and not with other nations, and therefore he's of the opinion that we have to judge on each one of Sophic, if he's from Yishmael or Bnei Keturah. And from Sophic, they would be liable to circumcise. Melos Chinuch explains that the question of Shagas Aliyah was that Bnei Yishmael, Bnei Keturah mixed with other nations, and there are a minority of other nations. And the question is, do you say by Bnei Noach, you go according to the majority, or only by Yisrael do you go according to the majority? The Melos Chinuch is of the opinion that all the nations would be liable with Milah, because maybe by an Issa we go to Chumrah. The Pri Megadim in Tevis Goyma points out that Bnei Noach are obligated to keep something that they're not sure about, if they're commanded about it, even if we're a Sophic. Even when in doubt. Let's say a question of Eivim and Achai. A Goy would not be able to use it to say Sophic. It's a Sophic, and therefore I can have it, because the rights it's the Chumrah. the Mamshik cites in Shagas Hayah, the Bnei Noach, doubt is permitted. The questions to the Rambam here, it seems to be in the Bnei Noach would be Chaim Yisofik, and the answer the Rambam inferred to right here, the Bnei Yishmael were mixed with Bnei Keturah, meaning Bnei Keturah were less than Yishmael. Bnei Keturah should have been bottled, and there's still an obligation on Bezin to circumcise Bnei Keturah. Even if we don't say that by a goy there's a din of roiv, even if we don't say by a din there's a din of suffix,